Hi everyone, my name is Sam Bark and I am a cartographer at Esri UK, and today I'm going to be talking you through my typical workflow of creating and designing a map, and I'm going to draw particular attention to some of the cartographic considerations that will hopefully inspire you to spend a second longer thinking about your cartography when it comes to designing your own maps. So as a cartographer at Esri, one of my main roles is to create and design maps for public consumption, either through some of our blogs on our website or perhaps creating a map that ends up in the media and the news. Therefore, it's important for me to ensure that the design of my map meets a certain standard to allow the end user to fully understand what the map is telling them and also to interpret the data. So today I'm just going to be walking you through some tips and tricks and things that I look out for when designing a map. Today, I'm going to be focused on three key things when it comes to designing a map. I'm going to be talking about the data, the audience, and the overall visual of the map. So the first thing is data. So I think it's important when you are playing around with some data and you're trying to design a map, it's really, it's integral for you to understand what your data is showing. I think it's hard to create a map and tell the audience what your data is showing if you don't understand it yourself. So I think there's a large importance on spending time getting to know what data you're working with, how to interpret it, and how best to showcase that. The next thing, and I think probably the most important thing, is who is the end user? So I think many of us could probably design and create a map that, if it was just us that had to use that map, then we'd be absolutely fine. But, the reality is a lot of the maps that we design are consumed by people that aren't in the GIS industry, people that don't look at maps every day. And so where you or I might find some of the icons or symbology styles quite easy to understand, somebody that has never looked at a map or someone that is not familiar with GIS terminology, they might not quite understand that. So it's important to make sure you keep your audience in mind when it comes to designing your map. And that kind of leads me on to my last point. So the visuals are what we're going to focus on mainly today, and they're kind of driven by both the data and the audience. So, what is the appropriate symbology to use? Well, it actually depends on who the end user is, will define how I'm going to, choose my symbology. And likewise, what does the data show that might influence the colors that I use within my maps? So I'm now going to jump into my map. One of the things here I think you'll notice is I'm working in the Map Viewer Beta here. So this is just a quick plug on another video that I've done, an in-depth overview of the new product. It's really good to use, but go and check out that video if you want to know a bit more about the beta product. But for today, I'm just going to touch on a couple of high-level symbology styles and talk about the pros and cons of each of them. So the data that I'm working with today is the Public Health England COVID data. So this is a very basic data set. So for each upper tier local authority, it's got a value for the total number of cases and the total number of daily cases. So that's all I'm working with today. And I guess the reason I want to use this data is because, the majority of you watching at some point will have been impacted by COVID in one way or another. And so by using this data, it kind of makes you, the viewer of this video, the target audience of my map as well. So hopefully, some of the decisions that I make, the cartographic decisions I make, you'll be able to relate to how an end user might feel looking at that map. So let's start by showing you the data. So this is the original data set here. And as you can see, it covers all of England, and each individual upper tier local authority has the relevant data that I just showed you. So, for example, Cumbria has total number of cases. And what I want to do today is show you a variety of ways I can map the total number of cases. So the first one I'm going to go to is arguably the most popular symbology style, and that's a choropleth map. So a choropleth map is, often used and probably the most easily to recognize type of map. And what this is showing me here is the darker the color of red, the higher the count of total cases. So it's very easy to digest and very easy to understand. However, a choropleth has a tendency to misguide people when it uses total values. So the reason being is because I'm looking at this map and I'm comparing and contrasting two different areas, but actually those two areas have a different shape, so they're different sizes, and also a different population. So it's difficult to compare, for example, Cornwall versus the borough of Camden, because they are completely different in their characteristics. The way that you can get around this is by normalizing the data. So if you were, to use population as a normalization method, then that would allow me to compare two different areas based on the fact that they are showing the same value. So the next thing I want to draw your attention to on this map in particular is the color. So I've used, the default color here is red, and when we're mapping a health tragedy and we've got the color red, it's a very emotive color. Often it connotates danger and death. So we have to take a moment to think about whether that's the most appropriate color to use when mapping, the COVID crisis. So I have to ask myself, can I reveal the same message without using this, attention-grabbing color choice? And the answer is yes. I can use any variety of colors, and I'd still extract the same information. So the next symbology style I want to talk about is the dot density. So I'm just going to go into these styles here, and you can see at the moment it has one dot equal 553 cases. So dot density is a really good way of showing clusters of areas, and it is essentially drawing a randomized dot on the map to represent a value. So as you can see, 1 equals 553. If I then move that down to 1 dot equals 1 case, you can see how the map completely shifts. So now I'm looking at, London and sort of south of England, clusters around Manchester and Liverpool, and all of a sudden they have lost their symbology style of being a dot, and actually they're almost looking like a choropleth map. So using a dot density, it really sometimes struggles to deal with the highest count and the lowest count. It really depends on the purpose of map whether you think that's relevant to use or not. The only other thing to remember as well is it's randomly positioned points on a map. So if I zoom in, to a specific area, I might think that actually that dot's right on top of my house, and that might start worrying me. But it's just something to consider when using a web map and allowing someone to zoom into a certain area. People might infer that information differently to how you intend it. So I think that's just one of the caveats to using dot density. But one of the benefits is I think it looks really nice. I think it's a really smart way of mapping different clusters and different patterns, whilst also showing total counts, where unlike choropleths you can't. So finally, I'm going to move on to proportional symbols. And so you can see here, the proportional symbols are a good way of showing total counts. So you can see there's a legend on the left here. So this is my preferred way of showing this type of data, because we're allowed to show full counts per area, per local authority, but at the same time, it's allowing us to compare different areas of different size, and that's one of the key things that the choropleth can't do. It associates the entire area with that value, whereas here it's not a dramatic bright red color. It's actually given us the same information, the same circle sizes based on that value, and we can infer our own comparison from that. So that's one of the strengths of it. The negative of using a proportional symbol is sometimes, the small areas, can get lost a little bit. So, for example, look at London. That's not actually telling me all too much. So, in that scenario, I might want a cutout map of London specifically to focus on that area. And also you can see it's clustered. That's sort of a similar issue. Is if the symbol size is too large, it's quite hard to infer what that information is telling me. So just a general couple of things about using web maps. So web maps is in this sort of time of COVID where the data is changing every day. It's important for us to be able to rapidly create these maps and keep up with the changing data, and also share that information widely. So you'll have seen 101 different COVID related maps, I'm sure. And that's, the power of web mapping is the fact that we can create and share these maps in an instant. So that's a really good thing about using web maps for mapping the COVID crisis. But actually, on the contrary, there are some of the drawbacks that people just need to be aware of when they're designing their map. And that is the fact that people can zoom into certain locations. So, with an interactive map, I might zoom into one of these proportional symbols. And actually, if I get all the way down to my local area, again, that point might be on my house, and all of a sudden I might be thinking I've got 3,000 cases in my local neighborhood, which is, obviously not what we're looking for the end user to interpret as. So one of the ways you can get around this is adding a zoom extent. And what that does is it restricts the level at which users can see that data. So that's quite a nice way of restricting them without, impacting on the data. So hopefully that's given you quite a introduction to my workflow and the considerations that I have when I design a map for public consumption. I think, a little goes quite a long way when it comes to cartography. And I think if you follow some of the key points, that I've made in this video about thematic mapping and, choosing the correct symbology, I think that allows so much more from your map and allows so many more people to access it. So hopefully that's all been very useful. If you have any more questions, feel free to give me an email. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.